What's up, guys? Nick Whalen, Jim Coventry here with you. We are recapping all of the fantasy football takeaways from week one of the NFL season. We'll hit as many games, as many players, as many position groups as we can. More fantasy football talk coming your way in a moment. All right. The week one recap episode here of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Nick Whalen, Jim Coventry. Jim, appreciate you stepping in for our guy, Jeff Erickson, abandoning us in week one of the NFL season. You know I'm a golfer. Jeff's he's doing like a sweet 10-day golf trip down in Alabama. The best possible excuse he could have. But we look forward to welcoming Jeff back to the show next week. Again, Jim, appreciate you stepping in. A lot to get to today. This is one of my favorite episodes of the entire season. We get to overreact, maybe underreact to just about everything in the fantasy football world. But before we dive in, we do have a message from our presenting sponsor, Underdog. We're so proud to partner with Underdog Fantasy for the NFL season. Underdog is the easiest place to play fantasy sports. It's also the fastest growing fantasy app in the industry. In addition to their popular best ball contests, Underdog offers great DFS pick'em games. You could pick whether your players will have a higher or lower stat total in this week's games for a chance to win big. You can win up to 1,000 times your money in a single night by picking between 2 and 8 players and building a pick'em entry. I did a ton of pick'em throughout the weekend, Jim. I know you did as well. You know, we had some of our picks up over at Bookies Plus. It's so much fun, man, especially for those standalone games, you know, throwing in a couple entries on Thursday. And we had the Friday night game between Philly and Green Bay. And then, of course, loading up on Sunday. Looking forward to doing that on Underdog throughout the season. If you have not played on Underdog, sign up right now and use our code RWNFL. Claim your first free pick plus first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or just find them in the App Store. They have an awesome app, great user interface. Don't forget to register with our promo code RWNFL. That'll get you a free pick and a first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Must be 18 or older to play. You got to be 21 in Massachusetts. You got to be 19 in Alabama and Nebraska. You got to be present, of course, in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY. Or just text HOPE-NY to 467-369. All right, Jim, a lot to get to, man. We'll try to buzz through, as many of these games as we can. I want to start with the carnage in New England, man. It felt like the writing was on the wall for this game in the days leading up to Sunday. Earlier in the week, I had to get my picks in on Wednesday, and I'm like, man, I don't feel great about this. Cincinnati, they've underperformed each of the last 2 years in week one, but it's New England, man. They can't possibly come out flat against this team. And then we get the news that T. Higgins is out. We get the news that Jamar Chase, he's going to play, but apparently he has food poisoning and he might be on a pitch count. This was one for the third straight year, Jim. You just felt like within 2 drives, you're like, oh boy, this is not going to go well for Cincinnati. 34% of Circa Survivor entries gone just based on this game.
I had Cincinnati as my survivor pick, and then Saturday I was like, you know what? Done. I just moved off it. I moved to the Bears, but the whole thing was, like you said, Higgins I knew was the doubtful. I knew but it was when they added Chase with an illness. I'm like, is he really sick? Is he going to play? Is he going to not? Too many bad vibes out on that game completely. And we saw them on the field, and it was like dink and dunk on offense. It was not good. Burrow, 164 yards. I mean, wow, 21-29, just nothing worked. Mike Gesicki does catch a touchdown, but then it's overruled. Got multiple games on. It looked like a good catch to me. Apparently it wasn't. That really hurt them as well. Andre Yoshibas, I was worried because no Higgins and maybe a limited Chase, he would see real coverage. The beauty of Yoshibas is if they both are playing Chase and Higgins, Yoshibas is good with less coverage. With real coverage, he goes 3 for 26 for 6 yards. So nothing worked. Zach Moss got a touchdown. Didn't really matter at that point. No one player looked good.
I think that's a good way to sum it up, Jim, for Cincinnati. And again, unfortunately, this has become a trend for this team early in the season, and they're going to have to find a way to snap out of this right away, because this was the early cupcake for Cincinnati. This was the most lopsided spread of week one for a reason. They go to the Kansas City Chiefs on Sunday afternoon in week two. So best of luck there if you're the Cincinnati Bengals. And you mentioned the touchdown that wasn't for Mike Gesicki. Very next play, Tanner Hudson over the middle. Looks like he's going into the end zone, fumbles that ball. Coming out of the half, the Patriots are punting. The Bengals fumble that punt. I mean, it was one of those games where they checked every box that you need to lose, not only not cover against New England, but to lose a game like this straight up. Certain things have to happen. Cincinnati hit all the benchmarks.
It was just, it could not have been worse. And I don't think it's necessarily getting better anytime soon. It's not just because they're playing Kansas City. Right. I just don't see it changing right now. Trey Hendrickson, we don't even talk about that. He was unhappy in the offseason about his money. Their top players are not happy. Chase isn't happy. Higgins isn't happy. If these guys aren't happy, what's the culture in the locker room?
It's not great right now, man. It's not. And we'll see about T. Higgins in week two. I mean, if he's not out there, that feels like a really, really dangerous spot for Cincinnati. Could potentially be 0-2 to start this year. They do get the Commanders and the Panthers in weeks 3 and 4. So that there's a chance here to right the ship for Cincinnati, but a lot of concerns coming out of week one. Ramondre Stevenson on the New England side of things, 25 for 120 and a score. I mean, almost 5 yards per carry. I thought, the workload was not surprising, right? This was kind of the script that we expected from New England, playing it very conservatively, playing for field goals, essentially, a lot of long drives. But I was surprised by the efficiency for Ramondre Stevenson. It's like, if you're Cincinnati, you should kind of know what to expect here. I mean, Jacoby Brissett is not going to be airing the ball out. 15 completions for 121 yards for Brissett. No New England receiver really went off whatsoever. Austin Hooper was their leader on 2 catches for 31 yards. But the backfield split for Cincinnati, what did you make of that? Zach Moss versus Chase Brown.
It wasn't a weird game. They didn't trail by enough to have to go super pass heavy. Neither of them got a lot of work. I mean, so that's the first thing. They didn't get much work at all. So I just think it's weird week one. I mean, Brown gets 3 carries. They needed some explosiveness, and they didn't go to him. It was like they lacked vision, because in this game, they could have used some explosiveness, and that's what they could have gotten from Brown. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if the coaching staff was in the same funk the team was in, because this is not the game you want to grind it with Zach Moss. If the Patriots could do one thing well, is they can stop a grinder running game. They can definitely do that. And that's what they did. And they only ran him 9 times. So it's not like they ran him 20 times. But to go 9 carries to 3 for Brown, they just missed the boat on potential. If Brown gets those 9 carries, maybe 1 or 2 of those turn into a 30-yard game. And all of a sudden, maybe the momentum changes. But you're not changing momentum with Zach Moss running the ball. So I have to think they're going to excuse it because T. Higgins was out. Case, they didn't know his status. I think they're going to excuse it for that. But the underlying problems of how they approached the game, it didn't make any sense.
All right, let's talk Jags-Dolphins. I've been beaten into submission by this Jags team, Jim. I was watching with my wife on Sunday, and she's like, "Oh, you don't really even see that upset that the Jags lost." I'm like, I made a conscious decision before that game started, before we even got to week one. I'm like, I am mentally detaching myself from this Jaguar season. Whatever happens, happens. Obviously, I'll be rooting for them deep down. But my goodness, man, this was the most Jaguars way to start this season. I mean, they get off to a fantastic start. Offense looks great early on. Brian Thomas gets involved, got a touchdown from Trevor Lawrence on an incredible throw. I thought Lawrence kind of leading him to the back corner of the end zone. And Jacksonville does what it does, man. This is why the Jaguars are the Jaguars. ETN fumbles, arguably the biggest swing play of the entire week. Jacksonville had a 92% win probability before that touchdown, or before that would be touchdown, I should say. If that goes in, it's hard to see Miami clawing back into this game. And here's the thing with the Jaguars, Jim, and this has been the case throughout the Doug Peterson tenure. When one thing goes wrong, Travis Etienne did not lose them the game on that fumble. It certainly went a long way toward accomplishing that, but the game was not over. Jacksonville was still leading. Miami, I mean, the Jags ended up going for a 4th down on their own 30-yard line on their ensuing possession. This team panics. When one thing goes wrong, they try to get it all back at once. And you can't do that in the NFL. You absolutely cannot do that. You're going for these ridiculous 4th downs. The play calling completely collapsed in the second half. There's still all this mystery around who's even calling the plays. Doug Peterson seems to think it's just, this fun narrative. It's not, man. This team is a complete mess. And this was such a winnable game in week 1 for a Jacksonville team that does not have a ton of room for error. They play the Browns. That's a tough defense in week 2. They got to go to the Bills, to the Texans, and the Colts for their first 5. I mean, this is one that they should have banked as a victory. In terms of fantasy takeaways here, pretty straightforward on the Miami side of things, right? We love the narrow offensive tree here, right? Tua, the leading passer in week 1, 338 yards for him, just 1 touchdown. Looked pretty shaky, I thought, early in this game. I think Miami felt some of those losses on the offensive line, but they were able to kind of get Tua moving around in the pocket, buy him a little bit more time in the second half. That's when we saw the big plays to Jalen Waddle. He had a 63-yarder. Obviously, Tyreek Hill had the 80-yard touchdown that really brought Miami back into this game. Devon Achane didn't get a whole lot going on the ground. I mean, Miami as a team, just barely over 3 yards per carry in this game. Achane was stuffed at the line, several times, just 10 carries for 24 yards. Great to see him getting the goal line work. However, he did plunge one in from the goal line for his only touchdown, but 7 for 76 through the air for Devon Achane.
Yeah, that really helped them getting those reception yards for Achane, because I want to narrow the rushing attack just down to Mostert and Achane. They were 2 yards a carry, 16 for 33. You can't have that. This is a team, in each of the 2 years that Mike McDaniel has coached this team, they have come out with something crazy good on offense that couldn't be stopped. There was nothing. There was zero this year. I mean, it was like there were no adjustments made from last year after the league kind of figured them out. That was stunning, because look, Tyreek Hill wins on his own. It doesn't matter who the quarterback is. He wins on his own. You saw the touchdown. Because he could do things that human beings can't do. So that ends up cashing for them. But overall, they're going to have to get more out of that running game. They can't go in to games with Mostert and Achane getting 2 yards a carry. That's not going to work. Very, very concerning. But like you said, for fantasy, narrow target tree, and all that talk about Jonnu Smith being weaponized, 28% of the snaps, 1 catch, 7 yards. Realistically, how do you funnel targets away from Hill and Waddle? Now, Waddle only had 5 targets. He's the one that doesn't see the Hill level, but he's usually second in line, and it's not close with the number 3. So they're smart enough to know these 2 guys can win us games, and obviously it did, as they both went over 100 yards, and despite the Jaguars really losing it, it wasn't Miami winning, it was the Jaguars losing it. But again, these superstar players, they did what they had to do.
You can get away with that against Jacksonville. We'll see if that works on Thursday night. Short week for Miami, taking on the Buffalo Bills in week 2. Real quickly on the Jags backfield, a lot of Tank Bigsby love coming into the season. Bigsby was an abject disaster last year. I think the plan was to work Tank Bigsby more into the mix during his rookie season. He had drops, he had fumbles early on, kind of ended up in the doghouse. That led to a lot of weeks where we're seeing ETN with like an 85 to 88% snap share. That's not going to be the case this season. I'm not jumping off of ETN by any means. Obviously, the fumble was huge here. I mean, his line looks a lot better if he just finishes off that run and finishes with 2 touchdowns. But it's a little bit glaring when you see Tank Bigsby, 12 carries for 73 yards. Travis Etienne, 12 carries for 44 yards. Bigsby looked like the more effective runner in week 1. I'm going to be grabbing Tank Bigsby where I need some depth. I still view him as more of a handcuff to ETN as opposed to, a shared backfield. But it's going to be something to watch over these next couple weeks.
I frequently talk about the change of pace back. This is an opposite way to look at it. But 2 years ago, you had Zeke Elliott setting the tone, and then Tony Pollard coming in really fast. Defenses can't change your speed. They kind of play at a set speed. You can't just say, hey, Pollard's on, we got to play fast. It doesn't happen that way. Derrick Henry, we saw with Tyjae Spears last year, benefited from, that pace. Well, this is the opposite. ETN's the explosive guy. Big B is the guy that's a little bit different, but he benefits from that because he a little more no nonsense of a runner. He took advantage of it. And if we think back, the first year ETN was playing 2 years ago, he had the foot injury his rookie year. He missed the whole year. But when he came in that first year, we saw he got a couple games at usage, and then they always would scale it down quickly. Well, last year after the bye, ETN went from 18 carries a game down to 12.9. So it's been clearly defined that they are going to limit his work. And like you said, the buzz on Bigsby is they want somebody to take work. Well, as of week 1, they found somebody. So ETN's volume will be down.
All right, before we talk a little Arizona Cardinals and Marvin Harrison Jr., we got a message from Verse Fantasy. Why wait all season to win in fantasy football? With Verse Fantasy, you can cash in every week. Download the Verse app, sync your fantasy league, and start wagering and winning today. Verse Fantasy is the new way to play fantasy. There's no need to draft a new team or bring your league to a new platform. Simply sync your current league from ESPN, Sleeper, or Yahoo into the Verse Fantasy app and instantly get money lines and spreads for your league's matchups that week. Playing fantasy for fun, it's cool, but playing for real money, that's the future. Play for real money on your own underdog lines and place contest entries between primetime games to bet on your own comeback. Verse will even show you your odds for winning the title or being crowned the Sacco, every player's nightmare. Enter the arena this season with Verse Fantasy and use our promo code ROTO, that's ROTO, to get 100% deposit match up to $50 when you sign up. We're also brought to you by Fanduel. NFL season is here. Fanduel is giving away a special new user offer to RotoWire fans. Sign up and bet $5 on any FanDuel market and receive $200 in bonus bets, plus 3 free weeks of NFL Sunday Ticket. Visit sportsbook.fanduel.com or download the FanDuel Sportsbook app in the App Store today to claim this offer. That's a pretty good offer. Bet $5, receive 20 in bonus bets, 3 weeks of NFL Sunday Ticket. Go check that out at sportsbook.fanduel.com. All right, Jim, we had a question in the chat about Marvin Harrison Jr., and it's a good one. He said, did y'all touch on Marvin Harrison Jr.'s disappearance? Is it time to panic? I burned a second-round pick on him. I think a lot of people burned a second-round pick on Marvin Harrison Jr., and I will not be doing any victory lapping in week 1, or really at any point this season, Jim. But I've been all over XM saying I'm not paying that price for Marvin Harrison Jr. for any rookie wide receiver, even with someone the pedigree of Harrison. Arizona put up 28 points. I thought for the most part controlled this game, through 2.5 quarters at least before letting Buffalo back in the third. Didn't see much from Marvin Harrison Jr. 3 targets, 1 catch, just 4 yards. That was also the case for Rome Odunze in Chicago. We'll talk about him in a little bit. It was Greg Dortch who led the Arizona Cardinals, 6 catches for 47 yards. Trey McBride was the target leader, caught only 5 of his 9 targets, still gave you 30 yards. Just a disaster week for elite tight ends all around. We've all seen the highlight at this point, Jim, of Marvin Harrison Jr. running wide open, literally doing jumping jacks, begging Kyler Murray to throw him the ball for what would have been a go-ahead score. But I'll put it to you very simply. Are you panicking about this very quiet performance to begin the year from Marvin Harrison?
It was a very weird football game. First of all, Arizona goes up 17-3 in the second quarter. And they were doing it. James Conner wasn't running a ton, but they used him as a receiver, used him as a runner, and they were establishing a presence. And in doing that, I think what happens is that subliminal switch, I call it. You're up 17-3. You know the other team's dangerous, but you had this 14-point lead and you start to believe it. And I really think Arizona just completely lost their focus after that point. They didn't score another touchdown after that. They had the kick return, 96 yards, DJ Dallas, and they had the field goal. They didn't score an offensive touchdown the rest of the way. And I think they took their foot off the gas mentally. And I think that was a big problem. And the other thing is, Buffalo, a lot of people want to talk about their defense. They lost everybody on defense. Rasul Douglas, Christian Benford, and I know Taron Johnson went down with an injury. Those are 3 very good corners, and that pass rush was very real. Von Miller actually looked like he could play again. That was surprising. Greg Rousseau had a big game. So realistically, Buffalo has a good defensive coach in Sean McDermott, and they brought it to Arizona. And Arizona, this is a bad matchup for them once they got rolling, and Arizona was off their game after they got that lead. That's all this is. Marvin Harrison's going to be fine. I don't know what his season numbers are going to be, but he's not going 1 for 4 every week. Clearly he's not, but he's still going to get 1,000 yards. I don't think he's getting 1,200 or 1,400, but I think he'll get you 1,000 yards. That's 70 a week. Not even. It's probably 60 a week. He ends up with that. He'll have plenty of good matchups. This was not a good road matchup, so I think it was just a complicated game.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, if you invested a mid-second round pick in Marvin Harrison, you're, unless you're just panic trading him after week 1, I mean, you're going to have to see it through. That's just kind of how it works when you have a player with that level of investment. 3 straight home games coming up, by the way, for Arizona. They get the Rams in week 2, the Lions in week 3, and a pretty appealing matchup against the Commanders in week 4. So ride it out, see it through with Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, it's not going to be any worse than it was in week 1. Bears-Titans, Jim, my goodness here. I have absolutely no idea still how Chicago won and covered this game. 24-17 victory for the Bears. Titans, of course, led this game 17-0. Good note here from Evan Abrams of the Action Network. He said dogs of 4+ points to lead by at least 17 at any point in the game were 66-1-1 against the spread over the last 5 seasons. The only time that we saw a similar situation to this was that wild Houston-Kansas City playoff game in 2020. If you recall, the Deshaun Watson-led Texans jumped out to a huge lead. Kansas City stormed back. This wasn't exactly, it wasn't exactly the same script here for Chicago, right? I mean, Caleb Williams, 93 passing yards on 29 attempts, 14 of 29 for 93 yards, with just nothing going whatsoever for that Bears offense. But the defense, the special teams stepped up for Chicago. Will Levis stepped up for Chicago. Very, very concerning performance for Levis, who hit some throws early in the game, but it just felt like got worse and worse as things went along and really started to panic. I mean, obviously one of the worst interceptions, pick sixes that you're going to see in recent NFL history. He finishes with only 127 yards of his own. Did throw a touchdown to Chikakonkwo. That was a nice throw, but also could have been picked off in the end zone. But 2 picks for Will Levis. Some positive takeaways, I think, in terms of Tony Pollard, who had 16 carries for 82 yards. We saw both Pollard and Tajay Spears involved out of the backfield. I thought Chicago actually did a pretty decent job limiting both of those guys. That was a huge hole for the Bears last season, was allowing running backs to get loose, catching the ball out of the backfield. But man, I mean, a hell of an escape by Chicago. I'll leave it at that.
First of all, the Tony Pollard thing, 16 carries to 4 for Tajay Spears. They each had 4 targets. That was very, very solid. Pollard looked like he was telling the truth last year. Like maybe there was an injury. Maybe that injury broke his ankle or whatever back in 2022. He said he never felt right last year. Well, what we saw in week 1, maybe he was right because he looked explosive. Looked like a very good running back. They're going to need him because as bad as Caleb Williams was, Will Levis is worse. And we saw it last year. He could throw deep, but once teams make him throw short and intermediate, he has no clue. And you could bring in all the players you want, but if your quarterback can't make those throws, you're in a lot of trouble. Now, with Chicago winning this game, like you said, Tyreek Stevenson, the interception return, and the block punt, it was crazy. But I'm going to give Caleb Williams a break here. I did not think that the defensive coordinator coming over from the Ravens would be able to install those simulated pressures right away. I thought that would take time. The simulated pressures they were running, the Bears had no clue where the pressure was coming from. Caleb Williams has never seen that from his collegiate days. He was under siege. He had no time at any point because the pressures were coming from different spots. Again, that's the point of simulated pressures. He had no chance. It was a big learning experience. I think Caleb Williams will be fine. This was a bad week 1 matchup because of the style of defense that was coached up.
Yeah, I think it was a predictable week 1 performance from Caleb Williams, right? We saw him kind of try to play USC ball, a little too often in this one, right? Kind of shifting around in the backfield, trying to outrun guys to the corner, figuring out that, I can't really get away with that, against NFL ones like I was even at times in the preseason. And yeah, I think he's going to be fine. I'm not panicking about Caleb Williams in terms of real life. Now, in terms of fantasy, we'll see. I mean, it was certainly concerning from that perspective. And, Chicago, Keenan Allen, I think, ended up leading the Bears in targets yesterday. Dropped a touchdown, by the way. Yes. Caleb Williams' line looks a little bit better. That was a great throw, I thought, to the corner of the end zone, just right off the hands of Keenan Allen, who ended up kind of limping his way out of this game late. He had 11 targets, only brought in 4 of those. Rome Odunze, just 1 catch for him, and it was a fluky one, right? That was a tip ball that he ended up bringing down, and I believe fumbling it after that. So kind of a weird game for Odunze. I thought they might make a point to get him a little bit more involved, but with the way that Williams was just, in my opinion, kind of panicking in the pocket, that might take a little bit more time. But Chicago Bears, they found their way to 1-0. They go to the Houston Texans and to the Indianapolis Colts over the next 2 weeks. Let's touch on Steelers-Falcons real quickly, Jim. Not a whole lot to say here. Encouraged by the workload, certainly, for Bijan Robinson, right? 23 touches for him, 18 carries, just 68 yards. We didn't really see, too many explosive plays out of Bijan Robinson. Did have a 13-yard run, did have a 14-yard reception. But we love to see the usage there. Saw a lot more Ray McLeod involved in this game than I thought we would. Kirk Cousins, predictably, looked a little bit rusty, threw a really bad pick, had another pick later in this game, 16 of 26 for just 155. This was such a Mike Tomlin spot, such a Mike Tomlin game for the Steelers. They win it without a touchdown, 6 field goals from Chris Boswell. that their punter ends up getting injured in this game. He's now out for the season, by the way. Obviously, they'll bring somebody else in. I was looking late last night at the NFL Next Gen stats page for Justin Fields, looking at the passing chart. I encourage you to go check that out. Maybe I'll tweet it out later. Literally no attempts anywhere near the middle of the field. Everything was to the outside for the Steelers. They knew what they had to do to win this game, and they did exactly that.
First of all, it was a Steelers crowd in Atlanta.
Oh, yeah.
It was loud. There were terrible towels out there. You would have thought this was a Pittsburgh home game. Here is the other thing. The Atlanta line is good. Offensive line. They weren't TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith good. They wrecked the game. Kirk Cousins had no time to throw. And they're learning a new offense. Now, the receivers more. Cousins really isn't learning the offense because he had that similar offense with Kevin O'Connell. But Drake London, Kyle Pitts, even Bijan Robinson, they're learning this offense. Pittsburgh gave them no time. This was a bad week one matchup. Again, if it was a true home field advantage, I think it would have been better. I didn't realize Pittsburgh would play like a home game here. That made a big difference. All that said, Ray McLeod, he is the number 3. He played 54% of the snaps. Usually, I expect they to use 3 receiver sets more. He easily led in targets. And in my 14-team leagues, I do have him in the deeper leagues. I have him rostered. And again, not a great player. He's going to get targets. He is definitely going to get targets. He's not going 4 for 52 every week. But if you're in a deep league depth-wise, you do add him because he will be on the field. And he showed flashes with San Francisco last year when they threw him the ball. He can play, but Drake London will be fine. Drake London, this is just with no time. He was never going to be able to get the routes to develop for him that way. Bijan Robinson looked good enough. Again, given the defense, this offense is going to be fine. But again, I think it's going to take them a few weeks to gel as it is. I think there'll be growing pains. But I think by week 4 or 5, I think this offense is going to be humming.
Well, if you're a Falcons fan, you better hope so because they go to the Eagles in week 2. They get the Chiefs in week 3, the New Orleans Saints, who took it to the Panthers in week 4, and then the Buccaneers in week 5. So there is some urgency here. I think this is one, if you're a Falcons fan, you were checking off week 1 as a win, and you're looking ahead to Philly and Kansas City and saying, yeah, maybe hopefully we can split those. I mean, there's a very clear path to the Falcons starting 0-3 and things getting a little bit uncomfortable for Kirk Cousins in this offense. Kyle Pitts, 3 for 26 and a wide open touchdown. That was somehow good enough to make him the tight end 4 this week in PPR leagues. So you'll take it. No notes for me really for Kyle Pitts. The touchdown kind of bailed him out. Level of concern for Drake London here. I mean, how much of that do you just chalk up to this bad matchup?
Yeah, again, as I was saying, it was all the pressure. Cousins had no time. What I thought was interesting, Cousins is a really good under center play action quarterback. I didn't see him running play action, and that buys you time. It was a poorly coached game. It was Zach Robinson's first game running the offense. I'll give him that. But you got to do some play action when you're going to face teams that are bringing heat like that. And at that point, when you have no time, and they were running pistols. I saw the under center and the play action, no play action. And Cousins was in like shotgun pistol almost the whole game. It's not comfortable for him. So, and that might have been done to get him time. It doesn't work that way. They needed play action. They'll get that figured out because the school of coaching Robinson comes from, they will get to the play action. Drake London was just, again, bad game plan. Joey Porter can play physical a little bit. And when there's pressure coming that quickly, you only got to cover for a couple seconds. And that's all he did. That was the whole thing. London is going to be fine. He's a superstar.
Yeah, it was a rough week. Overall for a lot of the offenses that we thought might take off. I mean, defenses were certainly ahead of passing games, especially in week 1. Only 14 quarterbacks threw for 200 yards in week 1. And that included Derek Carr, who finished at exactly 200 and was one of the stars of the week. I mean, only 2 quarterbacks threw more than 2 passing touchdowns this week. That was Carr with 3 and Baker Mayfield with 4. So I think you look around at a lot of these high-priced receivers and you're a little bit wanting with the production. You look around at all the tight ends. You're like, what is going on here? Not a single, high-end tight end really produced in week 1. I'm not panicking. If you drafted Mark Andrews or Dalton Kincaid or Travis Kelce, what are you going to do? You're not going to bail on those guys after week 1. I think all that comes around. I do want to back up though to Thursday night and get your thoughts on the Isaiah Likely versus Mark Andrews debate. Obviously, everybody's gone out and already added Isaiah Likely in leagues where you can do that. He's going to be a huge ad as this week progresses as well. I'm not quite backing off of my Mark Andrews shares. I think when you start to dig into, the way that game played out, the snap share, the routes run, I think Mark Andrews is going to end up being fine. But it was alarming the degree to which Lamar Jackson was looking to Isaiah Likely throughout that entire game, right? It's not like he had like 5 early catches and that accounted for the bulk of his work. It was all the way through the fourth quarter. Likely, over and over. What was your stance there? Are you grabbing Isaiah Likely? Is he a startable player for you in some leagues?
Well, clearly after 12 targets, you got to draft Likely and you got to say he's the next best thing. You got to say that. Baltimore, pardon my language, screwed themselves by making Isaiah Likely a big thing. And here's why. 3 new offensive linemen. They were in trouble. What do they need? They needed Patrick Ricard on the field, the fullback. He only played 24% of the snaps. He played 57 last year. They needed him to block. Here was the problem by putting Isaiah Likely on the field. You got Andrews, you got Likely. Neither of them can block. So the defense, 3 new linemen. They have no tight end to help. Guess what we're doing? We're going to put Lamar Jackson under a lot of pressure, and we're also going to stuff the running game. So now Derrick Henry, because Isaiah Likely's on the field, Derrick Henry can't run because there's no blocker. And also Lamar can't throw downfield because there's no time. And Kansas City knows these players very well. Spagnuolo coaches very well against them. So Isaiah Likely gets his beautiful underneath layup, but Kansas City's laughing to the bank. Go ahead, Likely. Take it all day long. Now he got the touchdown, and they almost won because of garbage time. And it really was garbage time, even though it was only 7 points. The Chiefs owned that game. But basically, Mark Andrews, why couldn't he do anything? Well, like I said, they couldn't block. He's a downfield seam stretcher. Well, there was no time to throw downfield. That's what happened. So the Justice Hill went off because, again, same thing. The dink and dunk guys ate in this game. If the Ravens don't fix this and put Patrick Ricard on the field, they're going to have a long, long season. If they don't, then likely it's going to be Superman all year because every team's going to follow this blueprint of they can't block us.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting, too. Andrews has traditionally struggled against the Chiefs throughout his career. Kansas City was doubling him. They were tripling him at times late in that game. So, I mean, again, it's Mark Andrews. You spent probably a top 50 pick on the guy. I think you have to see it through. If you have the opportunity to add Isaiah Likely as some insurance, go for it. But I think Baltimore makes a point to get him more involved. And I think you're right. It was game script. They had to adjust on the fly. And, if Isaiah Likely ends up being the safety valve over and over and over, then so be it. But that's not going to be the case every week. Let's talk some Anthony Richardson in the Indianapolis Colts. They ended up falling to the Houston Texans. Hell of a game, back and forth game. When you dig into just some of the raw numbers in this one, it's a 29-27 win for Houston. Texans dominated this game, right? I mean, 12 more first downs. They were better on third down. They were better on fourth down. They were in 76 plays to only 43 for the Indianapolis Colts. Time of possession, 40 minutes for the Houston Texans, 20 for the Colts. And this makes sense, right? If you weren't watching this game, every play live, you probably saw it on Red Zone. And every time it flashed to the Colts, it was just, a long gain or a long touchdown from Anthony Richardson. 9 completions for 212 yards.
Right.
9 of 19, 212, the 2 touchdowns, 1 to Pierce, 1 to Ashton Doolin. Those going for 60 and 54 yards, respectively. Very, very weird game for Indianapolis. A very inefficient game for Jonathan Taylor. He got his touchdown, to bail you out, but didn't have a single catch. 16 for 48 for him. And then, complete opposite on the other side. Joe Mixon, one of the highest usage games of his entire career. 30 carries, 159 yards, and a score for Joe Mixon. And 159 yards without any real explosive plays, right? He had a couple runs that went for like 10 to 14 yards, but it's not like Joe Mixon ripped off a couple of big plays here. It was just a steady dose of Joe Mixon. And, again, when Houston's running that many plays, everybody's going to eat to some degree. But it was great to see Nico Collins get his 6 for 117 on 8 targets. Tank Dell, 3 for 40. I think he'll live with that. Stephon Diggs, very low ADOT for him, but 6 catches, 2 of those going for touchdowns.
So we'll start with the Texans, like you're saying. You put those 3 receivers on the field, and the defense has to be hyper vigilant about that. Clearly, what happens is you got room to run the football. And the offensive line, remember, that offensive line in Houston, they were banged up like the first half of the season last year. Yep. They looked decent, and there was plenty of room because of the attention to the receivers. So Joe Mixon now he had that in Cincy too, but that was 2 receivers. Here they have 3 receivers that we have to worry about. So Mixon's going to have space, and he's going to get screens. He's not going to get 159 yards every week, but he is going to be able to grind it out every week. And this team was balanced. They ran more than they passed. And this is something Bobby Slowick, he ran to a fault last year, but now the running game could actually be successful. The thing that worried me was that you had Diggs, Tank, Dell, and Collins, 6, 7, and 8 targets. We don't know which one's going to do well week to week. Collins obviously has the big play potential. I know Dell's a big play guy, but Collins wins. Collins is like a true NFL alpha. He can win on lower targets. But Diggs only had 33 yards. He scored twice, so that was big. But Dell, the big plays weren't there. And like last year, we had the one downfield pass. We had single coverage. Last year, like that was a money every time the defender knocked the ball away. They kind of knew to look for him, which was interesting. He wasn't surprising anybody. He'll still have a good season. Understand that because he's in a great offense and Dell's a very good player. But that was interesting. On the Indy side of the ball, Anthony Richardson does some things that most human beings can't do. The touchdown pass to Ashton Doolin, the way he was breaking contain and he was kind of running against the grain, the throw he made and the sight line he had is one of those throws you shouldn't make. But it was like he knew when he threw it. You could tell there was confidence that he knew that window was there and he knew he had the arm to win on that throw. Not many quarterbacks in the league can do that. Like you said, 9 completions for 212 yards. It's sick because defenses have to respect his running ability, but he has a howitzer for an arm. And so that's going to be what it is. The short and intermediate passes, not great, not very, accurate. But this is a boomer bust player. It's going to be fun. But I was really upset that Jonathan Taylor only got 3 yards per carry. That was problematic. We were thinking we see RPO. Didn't see a lot of that. Really didn't. They need to kind of work their way into that because they need Taylor functioning if this offense wants to reach its peak.
They'll be in a good spot, I think, next week against Green Bay. Defense that gave up a ton of big plays, had a ton of big breakdowns against Philly in week 1. Jair Alexander just being Jair Alexander for much of that game. He's got a little Jalen Ramsey in him. I'll say that. And I don't think Green Bay is going to be able to move the ball whatsoever with Malik Willis. I haven't checked on what the opening line is. I think it was only Indy by like 3 at Green Bay. I'm all over the Colts there, even with some of the the inefficiency, the concerns, like you said, with Richardson on those non-60-yard, air yard deep passes. I think that's a great spot for the Colts. I don't think Green Bay is going to be able to do anything with Willis. Last thing I'll say on the Houston side is it's going to be frustrating, like you said. The Collins, Diggs, Dell, they're not all going to eat every single week. There's going to be somebody, at least one, if not 2, marginalized, depending on the matchups. What I like to see is the snap share for all 3, right? 64 snaps for Collins, 62 for Diggs, 51 for Tank Dell. They're not rotating in Robert Woods and Xavier Hutchinson to the degree that they were rotating in some of their depth receivers last season. We saw Noah Brown play a ton of snaps and whatnot. He's obviously in Washington now. Those are the 3, right? And they're going to put those 3 on the field as much as possible. So I think as far as week 1 goes, about as encouraging as it could be if you're invested in any of those 3 Houston receivers, because we knew that breakdown is going to be a little bit shaky week to week, but you like to see the high snap count for all 3. Let's go rapid fire through a couple more games here, Jim. Panthers-Saints. Not a whole lot to say here on the Saints side of things. This game was obviously out of hand early on. It was 30-3 at the half. Rashid Shaheed had his customary 60-yard touchdown. We saw 2 Saints tight ends, not named Taysom Hill, finish in the top 5 in terms of tight end PPR scoring this week. That will probably not happen again at any point throughout the season or perhaps NFL history. The concerns for me, or what I really want to talk about, lie on the Carolina side, right? We could look at Chris Olave and say, oh man, kind of concerning, quiet week. That was just kind of game script to me. Obviously it was not a high pass game script whatsoever in the second half. No. Olave was basically done after the second quarter. There are a lot of people that thought Carolina would take a step forward this season. The Panthers were one of the 5 most popular picks. Panthers +4 in Circa Million this week. I am very glad I stayed away from that. A lot of people thought Carolina could maybe even win this game outright at New Orleans. My goodness, man. This was a complete disaster, right? We've talked about, Bryce Young. They're trying to preserve him in the preseason. They want to preserve his confidence. His confidence can't be any lower. Literally threw a pick on his first pass, threw another egregious pick to begin the second half. I don't know where you go from here if you're Carolina. This is as demoralizing as it gets.
13 of 30 for Bryce Young. 13 of 30. Last year, I said coming into the league, from what I saw of him, he would have had to have been an outlier to be average. Not to be great, to be average. He wasn't an outlier. We could blame a little bit on the offensive line and the weapons. He's not an NFL quarterback. They got to play him because they picked him first overall. Buys him next year probably as well. not an NFL quarterback. That's not changing. Saints are not a lights out defense. Every year they get a little older, they lose more infrastructure. The corners are good. This was not a terrible matchup for Bryce Young, and he just is over his head. This offense is going to probably be one of the worst we've seen in a while this year. That's all. And defensively, they had two blue chip players, Derek Brown, and then J.C. Horn might be the cornerback. Wow. Derek Brown suffered a serious knee injury. He's done for the year probably. Massive. Like literally, they got two players, and they lost one of them. They might win one game.
Yeah, they're in huge trouble. 6-point dogs in week 2 at home against the Chargers. I think that's another game where they probably don't give up 47, but they just get slowly bled out by that LA offense. Speaking of the Chargers, 22-10 win over the Raiders. They win, they cover. This is one that had not a ton of interest in Circa Million. It was one of the lower played games on both sides, but it was almost a 50-50 split. A lot of people were on the Raiders. A lot of people subscribed to the Chargers Jim Harbaugh boost belief, and that ended up being the case here. And any takeaways? Obviously JK Dobbins, 10 carries for 135, got tracked down on a long run that I feel like 2 years ago was probably a touchdown for Dobbins, but still, by far the more efficient back between he and Gus Edwards. Edwards goes 11 for just 26, 2.4 yards per carry for him. We didn't see any Kamani Vidal. He was a healthy scratch, which is expected. I didn't think he'd be mixing in too much early in the year. And then on the Vegas side of things, Zamir White, he had 13 carries compared to 5 for Alex Madison, but just 44 yards for Zamir White. We saw Madison more involved in the passing game as well, 4 for 43 in the early score for Vegas. That was their only touchdown of the day coming in the first quarter. What did you see fantasy-wise in this game? Anything real actionable?
Madison, he got his receiving touchdown when the game was close.
Right.
But when they trail, he's going to be the receiving back. And I think the Raiders, they got to, you get that interim coach. We always think it's going to be great. It never works out. If this team ends up being bad, Alexander Madison is going to be a really good PPR running back because he is going to get more work than we think. I think we were hoping the Raiders would be a team that could play good defense and run the ball. Right now, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. So Madison, stash him on your waivers because, again, PPR, he could really get it done. On the Charger side, that JK Dobbins played 58% to 42% of the snaps over Gus Edwards. And Edwards is 29. And he's an aging back. And Dobbins, look, I don't know how he did it, but he looked recovered from his injuries. So that said, they're going to run the ball. Their offensive line, the tackles are really good. Dobbins could be a player this year for them because they're going to lean on him. I don't expect a whole lot from the passing game, but I think Dobbins could actually do something. I want to point out that the Raiders were in a spot almost through the midway through the third quarter. They made a couple big errors. They should have won this game. They kind of made enough mistakes to take it away, but they were in good shape for a long time in this game.
Well, the punt, I think, is probably what we're referring to most. Punting on 4th and 1, you're down 6 from the Chargers' 43-yard line. I don't know what the logic is there. I've yet to see any math that really backs up that decision. But I think that was part of the handicap if you were on the Chargers, right? I mean, the reason I was on LA was, look, I don't know what to expect from the Chargers. They shed a lot of talent in the offseason. In a game like this that feels like it could go either way, I'm going to side with the team that has the much better quarterback in Justin Herbert. It also seems like the Chargers are much better coached right now than the Vegas Raiders, which they got the Pierce bump last year, as you often see with the midseason interim coach. Everybody's kind of rallying around him. You're getting the defensive boost. It's a different story, man, when you're starting from week 1 and you're the guy, right? You don't have that narrative kind of behind you. And this Vegas team, I thought, looked pretty lost for most of the second half, and obviously ended the game with that Gardner Minshew interception to basically take any sort of comeback off the table late. In terms of the snaps, like you mentioned, JK Dobbins 33, Gus Edwards 24. Dobbins ran a route on 17 of his 33 snaps, carried it on 10 of those. So we saw Gus Edwards, he carried it almost half the time he was on the field, 24 snaps, 11 carries. I'm a lot more excited about Dobbins right now. I think we kind of know who Gus Edwards is. He's a very safe, number 2 running back. He's not going to provide you with the kind of upside that Dobbins does. And then Alexander Madison won the snap battle for the Raiders 36-23 over Zamir White. And, again, White carried on 13 of his 23 snaps. Madison just 5 carries on those 36, but much more involved in the passing game. Madison was exclusively the third down back for the Raiders. All 9 third downs, he was out there.
Yep. One final thing. It was 2 lost fumbles. Zamir White lost a fumble.
Yep.
Minshew lost a fumble, an interception. And I'm trying to remember through as I'm watching multiple games at the same time. I want to say one of those fumbles was in the red zone, and they were going to take a lead, and it completely turned. Yeah. So just a weird game.
Another very weird game, Seattle and Denver. Seattle -6 was my favorite bet of the week. They end up pushing. And honestly, I feel lucky to have pushed that, although they had a 2-score lead and gave up a garbage time touchdown to end up losing the cover. I cannot remember a mismatch like this where Seattle is clearly the better team. They're at home. It's week 1. You got a rookie quarterback coming to your place on the road. Can you remember a worse start? Interception on the second play of the game. Geno Smith gets hit as he throws, picked deep in their own territory. 2 safeties in the first half. One on a holding call, one where you just get straight up stuffed on a running play from the 1-yard line. And then you muff a punt deep in your own territory as well. I mean, those are 4 just totally lost possessions. They had another where they took over deep in their own territory after a punt. I think they had the ball at the 10-yard line, immediately took a sack on first down. So you're backed up to your goal line again. It was just a bizarre game. If you watch this one in the late window, turned out to be fine for Kenneth Walker. We do have to monitor his abdominal injury. He's dealt with ab injuries in the past. I thought he looked fantastic. 20 for 103 and a touchdown. Had another touchdown taken off the board, by the way, on a holding call by DK Metcalf. Probably the right call. One that I think was 50-50. Didn't necessarily need to hold him. He probably, he gets into the end zone either way, but his line would have looked even better had that touchdown not been taken off the board. I'm kind of flushing what we saw from Seattle in the passing game because, one, like I said, they literally lost 5 normal possessions in this game due to the safeties, due to the turnovers, due to the field position. They only, I was kind of doing a count. They only had like 5 normal drives where they're getting the ball that when they're not in the shadow of their own end zone. And they look pretty good on those drives. The other thing, though, this offensive line is a huge concern. Huge concern for Seattle. Geno Smith had no time to throw the ball downfield whatsoever. We saw almost no deep shots the entire day from Geno Smith. The longest completion ended up being to Zach Charbonnet out of the backfield. I mean, DK Metcalf was not really doing anything. Had a couple catches over the middle, but you didn't see anything deep to him. JSN had a couple catches early on, completely disappeared over the second half of this game. But I think Seattle had to kind of turtle up on offense because they knew that they could not protect Geno Smith. They lose George Fant early in this game. That was huge as well. You're basically playing with, kind of this ragtag backup offensive line. And look, man, if you can't protect Geno Smith against this Denver Broncos defense, that is a huge concern for me going forward. So I'm not, bailing on all the JSN optimism. I'm not bailing on DK Metcalf or any of that, although it was a little concerning how much Tyler Lockett was involved. That's, Geno Smith went to Tyler Lockett on the play of the game when they needed a first down. That to me is the one concern, but this was just a really strange script, a ton of huge mistakes for Seattle early on. They go to the Patriots in week 2, which is going to be a really fascinating matchup.
So Tyler Lockett gets more targets, receptions, and yards than DK Metcalf and Smith-Njigba combined. Yeah. But the yards, you throw Noah Fant in there, and Lockett had more yards than them. Lockett would come into this game less than 100%. That was weird and declining player. I have to rewatch the game film on this one. I do want to see how much Patrick Surtain was on DK Metcalf. Like I was watching multiple games and writing an article, so I got to go back and watch the game film. But my guess is Surtain spent a lot of time on Metcalf, and that really wasn't going to give much of a window for Geno Smith, and as you said, under pressure. So that could have been a thing. Again, I got to rewatch the tape on that one. But you're right. The oddity of the game, sometimes games just have a weird nature to them. And takeaways are tough for that reason. But Kenneth Walker, like you said, real deal. We did talk about having a more spread out offense and that it would benefit Walker. And that seemed to be, from a week 1 perspective, the case. He will benefit from a spread offense.
Yeah, no question about that. Again, just weird script for Seattle. Not panicking on JSN, not panicking on DK Metcalf. I think when you start a game with a pick, 2 safeties, and a muff punt, it's just going to kind of set you up for a disaster spot. And I think if anything, good on Seattle for still finding a way to win this game. That's the benefit of playing the Broncos in week 1. If they're playing almost anybody else, that's going to be a straight up loss. But they were at least able to get us a push and win that straight up. All right, we'll run through a couple more games quickly and then get out of here. Cowboys-Browns, man. I'm embarrassed to say I was on the Browns side of this one. I didn't have a great feel for it either way. I kind of bought into this. Well, Cleveland defense at home. I don't see Dallas scoring a ton of points. It's just kind of a 2-man offense, Dak and CeeDee Lamb. It turned out that was plenty because Cleveland could not move the ball whatsoever. They get a field goal on their first drive. After that, 5 straight 3-and-outs. I mean, just never really threatened. Couldn't get anything downfield. Watson was bailing out of the pocket. Watson looked stiff to me. And if we're going into year 3 of like, well, he's a little rusty, sure, whatever. He just doesn't look like the same guy at all. This is not even a take at this point. I've been on that all summer. He just does not look like the same dude. I thought, especially when he was rolling left, obviously he's a right-handed quarterback. When he's rolling left, he can't get his body squared up like he used to. Like, he's just not comfortable in, rolling outside of the pocket, which used to be his bread and butter. I mean, Dallas, I thought, played a really good game defensively, better than I expected for sure. But Deshaun Watson had opportunities down the field and was consistently overthrowing, underthrowing, throwing the ball out of bounds. It was a team that essentially entered desperation mode like the third drive of the game. And even with this pass heavy script, consistently unable to get anything downfield.
I'm not going to make a lot of excuses for Deshaun Watson. He's not a good quarterback. But what I'm going to say is this. Both starting tackles were out. They were facing Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence, and Mike Zimmer is their coach now. And look, as much as Dan Quinn did good for them, Mike Zimmer is an outstanding coach. This could not have been a worse spot for Deshaun Watson. Again, I'm not making an excuse for him. He's not good. But he probably performs better than that in most weeks when their tackles are coming back. They are getting them back. Conklin's close. Jedrick Wills probably isn't real far off. And if they have those two guys in the field and they're not facing Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence, well, Watson will have some time. Again, I'm not making an excuse for him. He's not good, but he'll be better than he was in this game. That's the most I could say for that. Dallas, I'm going to give credit to Mike McCarthy. Look, and I've been bagging on him for years. Last year, he understood after the week 6 bye, we can't run, so we're just going to pass, and it worked until the playoffs against the Packers. Another story for another day. But this game, he understood. He had a rookie left tackle, a rookie center, a horrible right tackle, and they got the ball out quickly when the game was in question, and it was a very good coaching job. He has done a very good coaching job now, a year and a game in, and I am impressed with what he does with this offense.
Browns go to the Jags next week. They are 4-point underdogs. If they get both tackles back, I think I actually like Cleveland in that spot. I don't trust Jacksonville. Tampa Bay, Washington, pretty emphatic performance here by the Buccaneers. Baker Mayfield, 4 touchdowns, 289 yards. Looked really, really sharp. Even the escapability. I mean, there were 3 or 4 times in this game where it looked like the Commanders had Baker Mayfield dead to rights for a sack in the backfield. He's able to escape. He was using his legs. Thought there were actually a few more opportunities in this game for Baker Mayfield to kind of matriculate the ball downfield. I mean, only 3 rushing attempts. Again, there were a few more times where I think he could have picked up yards. He had a chance late in this game to maybe even run one in when he was kind of one-on-one with Bobby Wagner. Chris Godwin, as we expected, working more out of the slot. Great game for him. 8 for 83 and a touchdown. Mike Evans getting off to a great start. 5 for 61 and 2 scores. Jalen McMillan caught his touchdown. 1 for 32 there. Did have 3 targets. Had a big drop early in this game that could have been another touchdown for McMillan. The Commanders side of things, Brian Robinson looks more like the guy. We saw Austin Eckler get some garbage time work, catching passes out of the backfield, but 12-2 was the carry split in favor of Brian Robinson. He goes 12 for 40 and a score. Jaden Daniels, I thought, all things considered, looked pretty good, right? And there's going to be a disconnect, I think, between Jaden Daniels, the real life quarterback, versus Jaden Daniels, the fantasy quarterback. But this game right here, where Washington is essentially down 3 scores for most of the second half, this is why you draft Jaden Daniels. 28.2 fantasy points.
Yes. Yeah, and that's the whole thing. Now, he runs 16 times, 88 yards, couple touchdowns, took a lot of hits. And that's the thing. When he's on the field, he's a top 8 fantasy quarterback pretty much every week. Start him. He keeps taking hits like this. He is not going to last long. Play him while you have him, and roster a second quarterback, because the hit is coming. It might not be next week. It might not be the week after. It is coming, because he does not try to avoid hits. What was really interesting, usually your mobile quarterbacks don't check down the running backs. The leading receivers on his team were Robinson and Eckler. After those two, by a lot. And then the next was, I can't run anymore, Zach Ertz at 28 yards, the tight end. So it was check down city. His receivers did nothing. You got 17 yards out of McLaurin, 18 out of Luke McCaffrey, 15 out of Zacchaeus, and 5 out of Crowder. His receivers were not used, and this was a very attackable secondary. Matter of fact, Tampa lost 2 corners in this game, and he couldn't throw to the receivers. This is a great matchup for Jaden Daniels, and he'll run, but I am very nervous when he plays a real defense. And when he plays Dallas, I'm going to fear for his safety. And he plays them twice. Yeah. Fear for his safety.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Tampa Bay secondary, which for the most part played well in this game, but Zion McCollum goes out. Bryce Hall goes out. We know for sure it's a serious injury for Hall. He's going to miss, a good chunk of time. They play at the Lions next week. So something to keep in mind if you're already thinking about week 2. And I'm also glad you mentioned, the target breakdown and the receptions breakdown for Washington. You see Daniel 17 of 24, relatively efficient. That's fine. A lot of short passes. 10 of those 17 completions went to either the 2 running backs or the tight end, Zach Ertz. I'm officially a little bit concerned about McLaurin, especially.
Huge, because against this team, if that was all you could do, and you needed to score points, you had to score points, and McLaurin was not a factor. So I am very nervous. If you are rostering McLaurin and maybe people are having week 1 trepidation, see what you can get for him. Take something, because this may be a lost season. You mentioned the Buccaneers. Look, the 2 pass rushers from last year, Chase Young, Montez Sweat, they're long gone. They were gone last year. They have no corners, like nothing. They had Benjamin St. Juste on Mike Evans. Horrible, horrible mismatch. And so I love what the Buccaneers are doing offensively. And I think they'll have a good season passing the ball. But we can't forget, this matchup could not have been any better. Mayfield was not seeing serious pressure, and he was not seeing serious coverage. And give him credit, because he took advantage of it. But this matchup could not have been better.
All right, let's finish out with Rams-Lions, Jim. Lot to discuss here, and we'll start before we get to Puka Nacua. Blake Corum. No sign of him. No sign of him whatsoever. I could not believe the broadcast not once mentioned Blake Corum's ADP. They didn't mention his August rise. They didn't mention, what happens when he's returning, or what happens with Kyron Williams returning kicks. It was a non-factor. And, I think it's as soon as we saw, Ronnie Rivers start to mix in late in the first quarter, you're like, oh boy. But, second half, maybe we'll see Blake Corum. It never happened. It never happened. Like, is this a Sean McVay troll job? Like, what is going on here?
I could find Waldo on occasion, but I couldn't find Blake Corum. Not good, man. Where was Waldo with the big old hat? That old
I'm familiar
thing. Yeah. Can't find Blake Corum. Not good. It's funny. The offensive line is a disaster for the Rams. They lost Steve Avila. Rob Havenstein was hurt. They have Alaric Jackson on suspension. And last year they ran downhill and they were really, really good. The line's not that good. Kyron Williams didn't get the work. 18 for 50. He got the touchdown. For fantasy, you're fine. 3 catches, 4 yards. And I know the Lions are the best run defense in the league, but if that offensive line is going to be a problem, Kyron Williams is in trouble. But here's the takeaway from the game. I said this last year. If Sean McVay likes you, you're going to be a star. Puka Nacua is a star. He goes down. Tyler Johnson. They drafted him. He was drafted by another team 4 years ago. I think Tampa drafted him. He comes in, big game. Oh my gosh. Tyler Johnson, 5 for 79 on 7 targets. So if Nacua is going to miss time, you don't have to be a fool not to make a claim on Tyler Johnson, because if he's going to play, Sean McVay's going to make sure you're relevant. Kyron Williams is relevant. Demarcus Robinson was relevant. If you play with McVay, you're gold.
Yeah, I expect Nacua to miss time. I know we don't have a definitive update quite yet. Was kind of trying to get loose on the sidelines. You could see that knee looked a little bit swollen to me, and don't want to be too speculative, but ended up taking the new look cart back to the locker room. Had a nice kind of like a side seat, which I had not seen before. Very cool update for the Rams. Tyler Johnson obviously had the big play late that set up the go ahead score for the Rams. And if you didn't see the game or didn't stay up for it, obviously the Rams ended up losing in overtime. I wondered, I think I might prioritize Demarcus Robinson over Tyler Johnson. I'm interested in both, but Demarcus Robinson outsnapped him 72-51. He ran 8 more routes on those snaps last night. And, Tyler Johnson's a very interesting piece, but he's a new piece in this system. And maybe he kind of becomes the pet project for Sean McVay if Nacua is out multiple weeks. But I feel like Robinson kind of already has that cachet with McVay, already has that cachet with Stafford. I mean, he closed last season averaging 7 targets and 64 yards per game over the final 5 regular season games. That was with both Kupp and Nacua healthy. So I feel like there's a little bit more of a proven track record there with Robinson.
Nick, it's a real specific role. Robinson's role isn't changing. His role is exactly that. He is in that lineup instead of Tutu Atwell because he's a block. He's a specific type of blocker, and he runs specific routes for McVay. His role will be exactly as it was at the end of last year and it was yesterday. If you do the math on the snaps, Nacua 32%, Johnson 65%, it was a 1-for-1. They played 100% together, 98, give or take. Yeah. So I think Tyler Johnson is going to step into the Nacua role. Okay. Demarcus Robinson cannot play the Nacua role. It's a skill set thing. He doesn't have the wiggle. So Johnson, in theory, does. Nacua is not an athletic guy, but Tyler Johnson fits into that role. So I think I get what you're saying, but I don't think DeMarcus Robinson's role is going to be any different because he can't be different. It is exactly what it is.
All right, fair. Good point by you. Rams have a good matchup next week at Arizona. So I think we'll learn a little bit more about this offense. Should get a good look at Tyler Johnson if they are without Puka Nacua. A lot of people are going to be asking about Blake Corum. You probably weren't starting him this week anyway, unless you're in a deeper league. So it's, to me, it's kind of a no change. We'll see how much he mixes in, but we're not going to bury the lead here. It's obviously surprising that he didn't see the field whatsoever. Even if he had just gotten one series, I don't think we're in this full on panic, but it was bizarre, man. So what are you doing?
Well, you stash him for 1 week. Yeah. If it's another week, you probably got to cut bait. You got to give him one more week. You just see what happens. Maybe it was a weird week 1 thing. I doubt it. But Kyren Williams is not durable. He is not a durable player. So if you can hold on, and if you can hold on to the bye weeks, you might not need to drop anybody right now, unless there's a great waiver claim out there. If there's not a great waiver claim out there, then maybe you hold to the bye weeks. And there's a probability that Kyren Williams doesn't make it that far without missing time. It may not happen, but it could happen. So Corum will play if Williams gets hurt. But yeah, when you have to cut bait, cut bait.
Let me put it to you this way. Would you hold Blake Corum over any of Jaleel McLaughlin, Bucky Irving, Tank Bigsby? Those are the guys who are widely available. We could throw JK Dobbins in there, but he's probably rostered in most leagues. And, are you chasing the upside on any of those backs, or are you holding Corum?
You're right. You're right. The other backs give you some value. If Corum gets that role, and again, Williams missed 7 games as a rookie. He missed 5 last year. He broke his hand in the NFC wildcard game. But all these other backs are going to get work. So they are more valuable than Corum. Corum is not valuable at all right now, right? So good call on that. I agree with you. You're totally right. Maybe if you are the Kyren Williams, you have him rostered, maybe you try, if you have, depending on your roster, maybe you make a trade and get Blake Corum for nothing and then put him behind Williams and then have that plug and play, because the fantasy manager who has Corum may have no use for him right now.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. All right, a couple other quick takeaways from this game. I mean, Cooper Kupp, certainly looking like Cooper Kupp, Jim. 21 targets for Kupp, had 5 catches like immediately in this game. And, it's so fun to watch him, right? It felt like he should have had more than 110 yards, but a lot of these were, kind of close sideline type of routes, but just surgical. That's the word that came to mind for me watching him in Stafford. I mean, it's just unbelievable when those guys are both healthy and both humming. I mean, the Rams, like you said, they were down Rob Havenstein, who's, in street clothes on the sidelines. They lose Steve Avila, who's probably going to miss, a few games here. He's dealing with an MCL injury. It kind of felt like Matthew Stafford knew what he was up against, and it was like, all right, it's just me and Cooper Kupp trying to win this game the rest of the way. And I think to even end up forcing overtime on the road with some of the deficiencies in that offense, I thought I was still really impressed with what I saw from the Rams. And, obviously Stafford would like that interception in the end zone back. That really felt like it kind of swung things early on. But Cooper Kupp goes 14 for 110 and a touchdown. The Cooper Kupp optimists rejoice. Obviously with Puka Nacua likely to miss time, it's to the moon for Cooper Kupp over these next few weeks. On the Detroit side of things, 4 for 45 for Sam Laporta. You're okay with that, especially given the context of the other elite tight ends this week. Gibbs, Montgomery, I think that looked about like we would expect. Obviously Montgomery got a ton of work on that final drive in overtime, punched in the touchdown. The numbers were a lot closer prior to that drive. So, wouldn't really be worried about Gibbs at all. And then Jameson Williams, man, 5 for 121 and a touchdown at a long run on a reverse as well. Just burned the hell out of Trey White on that double move for a touchdown. I got to eat crow here, man. I was a Jameson Williams skeptic. I thought, there's a little too much, Rashid Shaheed, where it's like, I like him in best ball. You're going to get the spike weeks. He looked fantastic, man. He looked faster. He looked bigger. He looked more agile than last year.
Man, it was a great opportunity because the Lions really needed to integrate an outside receiver. They've been very successful just funneling and pounding the middle of the field over and over and over, but they need to get one more element in this offense. And I know that Jared Goff's not always at his best throwing to the outside, but when defense has to focus so much attention on your interior weapons, they aren't going to be really tough throws. And we saw it. And if you want to start sit show we do on RotoWire YouTube every Sunday, 11 a.m. Eastern, we do the start show, we were talking about Jameson Williams, and we said he was a player to start this week. Darius Williams, the top corner for the Rams, was down. It wasn't going to be an easier setup to get him the ball in what should have been a high-scoring game. It was one of those in the start show. We definitely recommended Williams, and the matchups might not be this good going forward, but the fact the momentum started out good, that is only going to bode well for the Goff-Williams duo.
Yeah, no concern for me, by the way, on Amon-Ra St. Brown. We know who he is. I mean, I'm not jumping off of him. One quiet night, I thought, the Rams did a really good job kind of taking him out of this game, and that was part of the reason that Jameson Williams was able to explode with all the attention on St. Brown. The Lions get the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at home in week 2. They go to the Cardinals and then home against the Seahawks over their next 3. So pretty good setup here defense-wise for the Detroit Lions. Jim, we'll wrap it up there. I think we hit just about every game. Note that we did not talk about Giants-Vikings. Just didn't have a lot to say there. Good for Sam Darnold. Started the game, 12 for 12. Justin Jefferson looks like he'll be just fine. Keep an eye on Jordan Addison, of course. But the Giants, man, yikes. Thank God for the Carolina Panthers for kind of taking some heat off of the Giants. But we'll wrap it up there. Keep an eye out for a ton of content coming your way throughout the season, throughout this week on the RotoWire YouTube channel. We'll have 5 days a week NFL podcasts as well. Jim, you're stepping in for Jeff Erickson on the radio this week as well. That's going to be a lot of fun. You and I will be live tonight, 7 to 9 p.m. Central on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports. That will, of course, be during the Jets-Niners game. So if you're looking for some live look-ins, some live fantasy analysis, come join Jim and I, SiriusXM Fantasy Channel 87 tonight, 7 to 9 p.m. Central. Jim, thanks again, man, and looking forward to chatting later.
All right, everybody, good luck as we close out week 1.